Good day everyone, I am Canon Iram Constantino from 2FBSN. So for today, I'm going to talk about Rizal's annotation of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, a book written by Antonio de Morga, which is about how Filipinos work through the eyes of an outsider. So before we start, let us first get to know about the author. In this picture, you can see Antonio de Morga Sanchez Garay. He was a Spanish soldier, a lawyer, and a high-ranking colonial officer for about 43 years in the Philippines from 1594 to 1604. After he was reassigned to Mexico, he decided to publish Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas in 1609, which was then considered one of the most important works in the early history of the Spanish colonization in the Philippines. His book Sucesos narrates the history of wars, intrigues, diplomacy, and evangelization of the Philippines in a somewhat disjointed way. And because of that, modern historians, including Rizal, disagreed with some of Morga's views because they believe that Morga is a layman and not a religious chronicler that would write any relevant religious stories. According to Rizal, Morga was visibly more objective and sympathetic to the Indios. Morga's purpose was so he could chronicle the deeds achieved by the Spaniards, as well as various fortunes that they have from time to time in the great kingdoms and among the pagan peoples surrounding the islands. Rizal then argued that the conversation and conquest were not as widespread as portrayed in this book because the missionaries were only successful in conquering a portion of the population of certain islands. So how did Jose Rizal knew about Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas? Jose Rizal heard about the book from his uncle Jose Alberto, in which Rizal took a deep interest with, because as we all know, Rizal was an earnest seeker of truth, which marked him as an honorable historian. Rizal had this burning desire to know exactly the conditions of the Philippines when the Spaniards came ashore to the islands. Why did he annotated Morga's work? So Rizal decided to undertake the annotation of Morga's work in order to correct what has been distorted about the Philippines due to the Spanish conquest with the influence of Dr. Ferdinand Blumentritt, a Spanish historian. Rizal devoted 4 months to study and research about the book and took almost a year to print his manuscript, as it was mentioned that Antonio Herridor, who is supposed to be the publisher, backed out. Rizal's annotation of Morga's work is a cue from his first Philippine history. His annotations were categorized into 3, which was based on ambit Ocampo. First, Rizal corrected the original work with a straightforward historical annotations. Next is that Rizal has a strong anti-clerical bias, and that Rizal's main subject was education and the system of the government. Rizal extensively annotated Morga's work, which resulted in 639 items, or almost 2 annotations in every page. Also, he annotated Morga's typographical errors and commented on every statement that could be nuanced in Filipino cultural practices. One example is on page 248, wherein Morga described the culinary art of the ancient Filipino by writing, "They prefer to eat salt fish which begin to decompose and smell." According to Rizal, this is another preoccupation of the Spaniards, who, like any other nation in the matter of food, load to which they are not accustomed or is unknown to them. He added that the fish mentioned by Morga does not taste better when it is beginning to rot. On the contrary, it is bagoong, and those who have not eaten it and tasted it knows it is not rotten. Ferdinand Blumentritt also wrote a preface that emphasizes some salient points. First is that the Spaniards have to correct the erroneous conception of the Filipinos as people with limited knowledge. Also, that there are three kinds of Spanish delusions about the Philippines, which they believe that Filipinos were an inferior race, that Filipinos were not ready for parliamentary representation and other reforms, and that the denial of equal rights can be compensated by strict dispensation of justice. In Rizal's dedication, he explained many things, which includes his purpose for the new edition of Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. He stated that if the book succeeds in awakening in you the consciousness of our past, which has been obliterated from memory, and in rectifying what has been falsified and calumniated, I shall not have labored in vain, and on such basis, little though it may be, we can all devote ourselves to studying the future. In the last chapter, Rizal annotated that Filipino ancestors already have their own alphabet, which then proved that Filipinos were not illiterate as the perception of Spaniards. In Jose Rizal's historical essay, which includes the narration of the Philippine colonial history, he punctuated a certain sentence in which the incidences of agony, tragedies, tensions, and prolonged periods of suffering that many people had been subjected to. Also, he observed that as a colony of Spain, the Philippines was depopulated, impoverished, and retarded, astounded by a metaphor, with no confidence in her past, still without faith in her present, and without faltering hope in the future. Rizal added, little by little they lost their old traditions, the mementos of their past. They gave up their writing, their songs, their poems, their laws, in order to learn another doctrine, which they did not understand, and different from those inspired by their climate and their manner of thinking. They declined to degrade themselves in their own eyes. They became ashamed of what was their own. Their spirit was damaged and it surrendered, which was directly describing the Filipinos. The Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, as annotated by Jose Rizal, was published after 68 years by a publisher in Manila in the year 1958 to contribute his bit to honor Rizal. The present work is now the sixth volume of the series of writings by Rizal, which the Jose Rizal National Centennial Commission has published to commemorate his death. So in conclusion, Rizal's annotation made the Filipinos strengthen their identity for knowing their core origin, as it is important to become united as one. So here are my references. And with that, I am now going to end my presentation with Rizal's quote, that is, to foretell the destiny of a nation, it is necessary to open the books that tell of our past. Once again, I am Canon Iram Constantino from 2FBSN.